Just had to turn my mic on. Good morning. We'll try to move through it efficiently, but certainly give it as much time as necessary for the topics that have been entrusted to us. I think we'll dispense with the introductions. We'll kind of go through those as presentations are made. I think we'll at some point hit almost everybody in the room. So we'll go on to item 2, approval of the minutes from our last meeting, September the 8th.
So I'll move to approve those minutes.
Thank you, Councilman.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Perfect. Item 3, business. Item 1, parking garage study. I believe that's Mr. Smith.
Yes, good morning and thank you. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update of where we stand. We did receive a draft report from our consultant in reference to the various studies that we have out. Received those late Monday night. They're significantly long, and staff hasn't had a chance to even review them as of yet. And we want to meet with the consultant. They've asked to meet with us to kind of explain and walk us through what their findings are. But I think it would be sufficient to say that inflationary pressures are pushing prices up, as we all, I'm sure, expected. So at the next meeting, we hope to be able to bring back a more formal presentation on their finding. Continuing on, we are working with our developer on the parking app for payment for on-street parking. Again, everything gets pushed back in COVID times. They were expecting hopefully something in late October, but it's more looking like late November at this point for when we'll be able to roll that product out. Staff has been able to change the time limits and signage in the areas of Capitol Avenue, Jefferson, and Madison Street. So those are in place, and time limit, people are able to park there for 10 hours a day, up to 10 hours a day, and but obviously they have to carry quite a few quarters to do that. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Councilman Schreiber?
Yes, Mr. Smith, when do you anticipate an actual date to meet with the consultant? You're going to try to expedite that a little bit?
I'm hoping to do it in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Spencer?
That might be an opportunity for that to be opened up to this committee as well, so we can kind of hear some of the.
We would certainly anticipate the consultant coming to either virtually to present to the committee when we do set that meeting up, yes.
Okay, so that was not just going to be with
Well,
staff.
we're going to meet with them on the draft report, so we're understanding what they're talking about, and that we're all clear on what we're doing. But there will be a formal presentation to the committee, yes.
Okay, that's what I was speaking of. It was when you guys have the discussion over the draft to kind of, maybe that would help us to get a little bit of a head start, possibly. So, didn't know if that was going to be in person or.
Yeah, I mean, there's no big secret to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could invite folks, I suppose.
But yeah, it is. The reports are, I think, 2 of them are about 150 pages each. The other one, I think, is about 75 pages, 3 total reports. So it is a significant amount of information.
Well, I would hope it would be, since it was well past beyond the timeline of. So hopefully the product is
Right.
more extensive than what we anticipated. It sounded like it did.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Where are they coming in from?
Kansas City.
Because if we could get them here at the next meeting, doing it live versus virtual.
I'll certainly talk with them
I
about
think
that.
We saw during that housing presentation, as much as they were trying to, technology was working against them, and it was very difficult to try to comprehend and respond and ask questions. So if we could get them here, that would be great.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. It takes us to item 2. Upgrading the private stormwater system. Mr. Bangy.
Yes, in your packet there was a revision to what we had proposed for the stormwater conversion program. Essentially, what's changed from what you saw last time was the addition of paragraph D in section 31-283, basically allowing the council discretion in determining the costs associated with the installation of those pipes, either by reducing the cost that was established in Appendix Y or some other means, whether that be restoration costs or otherwise. And so that's the changes that have been made to the section since you saw it last time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilman Spencer?
Thank you for giving us that update, especially in a written format and context. It was really nice to have that already in front of us, as well as on the other topics as well. Appreciate that from staff. The question I would like to, and I really didn't want to bog this down any more than it has. I feel like, it's kind of has on my part, and I apologize for that. But I feel like there really needs to be an appeal process in this ordinance to where before a full vote is brought to the council to possibly change those funding allocations on case-by-case basis, that appeal process, I would feel more comfortable it would start here in this committee, and then that way this committee could vote and pass that information along to the full council, that the full council has some comfort level of at least feeling like, okay, Public Works Committee has looked at that issue and they're making a recommendation or they're not making a recommendation. So I just thought under subsection or under section 31-283 under section D, before the council votes to lower the cost to the petitioner, that the PW Public Works Committee would hear the case and make a recommendation to the city council before such vote takes place. So, but everything else looks really good, and I think it really hits the spirit and the tone of what I think most of us on this committee feels should be available to the taxpayers as far as some of these issues that they've had for a number of years. So thank you again for working on that.
So are you making that in the form of
Yes,
an
I am.
amendment to the document?
Yes. And
And that, we just need to make sure that we get the
well, as a-
language of it, but as soon as we get it, is there a second to that?
Thanks. I've been thinking about this project, and it behooves me to give the committee some counsel. In this type of program, the more discretion that you put into the program, the more traps there are and opportunities for some adversarial process. And you could go so far as to turn this into the type of decision that is due administrative review in the judicial system. It's when you have this type of discretion, you have the ability for people to claim that the discretion was applied inappropriately, and also subject to types of discrimination claims. There is another approach that the city council could take, where it's more of a set limit, first come first serve type of program that provides some funding for types of projects, but once the funding is gone for that year, then it's gone for that year, and you can reapply in the next year. It's very common in the St. Louis area for sewer lateral programs. The more I look at this really reminds me of the sanitary sewer private lateral replacement program in St. Louis County. So while I think this is a fine piece of work and would probably work, the more we fill it with places where there is discretion to be exercised, the more chances there are that those exercises of discretion can be challenged in the judicial system. And so I won't go as far as to say I don't recommend a process that has a lot of discretion at the council level, but I do feel it's appropriate for me to kind of just let you guys know this way does have some a little bit of hair on it as it comes to process, and that there are other ways to avoid that hair, but the cost of that is to reduce the amount of council discretion, make it more a administrative type program where, you know, there's not a whole lot of people, no lot of ways for people to say, well, you should have applied discretion and judgment in this way as opposed to that way. And there's no less opportunity for claims of discrimination when it's just first people through the door get the money, and once it's gone, it's gone. So for whatever that's worth, I thought it was appropriate to let the committee know that, you know, there's lots of ways to skin this particular, I'm gonna use that term. There's lots of ways to tackle this problem, and that we are leaning toward a particular way that open up some opportunity for adversarial process. So, for whatever that's worth, I'd be happy to expand on that more if the council or committee wants me to, or we can just kind of leave it at, hey, there's this issue. It's not fatal by any means, but it is going to be an issue, one way or another. So, for whatever that's worth.
So are your comments directed at the amendment or
It's
D in
really
specific?
kind of the project has snowballed a little bit, and it seems like every time we look at it, we're adding more and more discretion, and it's just kind of like it's kind of gotten to a place where it's like, okay, I'm seeing lots of opportunities for someone to get into a disagreement and have some official legal recourse here. So it's not directed at the amendment. I guess it's kind of directed at where it seems like we're going with it.
Councilman?
Do you know of other places that have it set up like we're
I have never seen
proposing?
this type of program. This is unique. This is something that's been created here in Jefferson City. The closest analogy that I can find is a program in St. Louis County where essentially everyone pays a property tax, and that creates a fund for private sewer lateral replacements, sanitary sewer lateral replacements. Because that's essentially kind of the same thing, where it's a private improvement that can be difficult for private homeowners to tackle. And it has a feel of kind of being integrated with the public the public system. They do that on a first come, first served basis. That's not the only way they could do it. That's just how they do it. But the advantage of doing that way is that there's never a lawsuit that comes from that program, because it's, if you're eligible and there's money available, you get the grant. So there's not much discretion that is exercised, not much judgment to be applied in any particular situation that someone can disagree with. It's just, if you're eligible and there's money available, you get it. You're done. And if the money's not available or you're not eligible, then you don't get the money. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just, if you go this approach, the more opportunities, the more points where there's discretion to be exercised, the more opportunities there are for disagreement and adversarial process.
And I
Councilman
guess,
Spencer?
I guess I would counter with the comment of, I don't think there's much more adversarial positions than you can have for a private citizen that has some issues of not their own creation, if you will. And so I think our intent was to try to start a process to where we could start addressing some of these and not continually have the excuse of, well, we don't have a right of way, or that's on your private property, so we don't have any responsibility to that. I think we do have a responsibility to that, and that's obviously something that I've been passionate about since I've been on Public Works. But I think it's a step in the right direction, so if my amendment will haze it in any way and slow it down and bog it down, then I'll remove it. I just think, if we're going to create an opportunity for people to increase the cap, I guess we'll call it, of what the city's portion would be, then, there needs to be a checks and balance there of how we get to that determination. So that was only my reasoning behind it, so.
And
Mr. Moraes.
and probably just a matter of process, we would typically bring any of those projects here first to let everybody look at it before we send them to the full council. So maybe in that process, we'd look at that. Now, especially if we had somebody applying for a lesser amount on their half or their share, you know, it would be very discretionary, so we'd have to have essentially a committee review it of some kind. So you know, in our heads, I think we were thinking, you know, when we wrote, you know, we just kind of made that up and stuck it in there at your request, and we were thinking it would come here anyway to be discussed. If that helps anybody. But I get back to Ryan saying, I get his point too. We actually have had, where's it, is Eric in here? He's right there. We have something similar with our backflow preventer.
That's right. We'll reimburse a property owner $500 for the installation of a backwater valve, and then that protects their private property from sewer backups. And
But it's their valve when they're done.
that's correct. They have maintenance and responsibility of it after that.
So it's more like what Ryan's talking about happened in St. Louis with laterals. It's on a lateral issue.
So it's just a flat amount, it's not a discretionary amount.
And they have to hire the work, and it's a licensed plumber.
Right.
Some of those kind of things. Of course, we have a list of licensed plumbers, we can tell them.
So, just to clarify for myself, your comments were directed at the language in D also, with some concerns that broadens it.
Yeah, it's just, it's D, it's a petition to the city council, so you're asking city council to essentially to exercise judgment, or is your project worthy or not? Well, based on what criteria? And then, you know, if we're going to then modify the program up, you know, say, okay, your project's now super worthy, you get more money, or it's maybe not worthy, it's probably the way to think about it, but your project's very expensive, and even at this discounted rate, it's still very difficult for you. We're gonna amend that up. On what criteria? And when you deny someone that opportunity, on what basis did you deny that? So those are the types of traps that I'm talking about, where the city council is called on in this ordinance to exercise judgment, and in certain types of settings, the city council is going to have to be prepared to defend that judgment if for whatever reason you deny, you deny a project, or you deny the ability to go up, on what criteria. It's because this is kind of a unique creation. This doesn't exist in law. There's no way of judging exactly what that is. My main concern is this an exercise of legislative discretion, or is this a exercise of administrative discretion? I can't tell. And my concern is if this is an exercise of administrative discretion, then this could be something where on hearing we have to call in a court reporter and allow them to be represented by an attorney. Kind of the whole gambit of the public process, the public hearing process. Especially, I guess it's the word appeal really make my ears perk up there. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with this. It's just I couldn't let the council and the committee consider this with saying this is a approach that could have some challenges in the future. I don't want to tell you it's wrong. It's just, if we're going to make this decision, I want you guys to have all the information and pros and cons that go along with that. And so,
Mr. Moraes?
Yeah, and I think we explained it last time, but maybe just touch on it again, is that, so, this is taken out of the sidewalk program language and kind of adapted, if you will, for this. Sidewalks tend to be a little more straightforward, although they can be very expensive and have a lot of issues with utilities and things like that. And so what we tried to do is determine a very flat fee for a property owner. Now, when the council does approve and take one of these on, if we go this route, there's a lot of risk there. When we get into stormwater projects, the cost could go up. I mean, all kinds of things happen. There'll be considerably more costs on the city side of this anyway. But once we start the project, or how we've done it in the past, any change orders that arise for whatever reason, again, utility things, having to adjust pipes, whatever happens, cost, implication, things like that. So we fully complete the project, but we'll have to have a fund to make sure we can get to the finish line. And so every time we start any construction project, the city, there's always a huge amount of risk on the city's part. We try to minimize it, but that's where we'll have to push through. So I don't know if just want to remind everybody of that, and in this process. And if there's a flat fee, if the fee's lower, maybe the fee should be lower for everybody. Maybe does that help Ryan's? Because every project, when you talk about lowering the cost, well, every project's going to have a different final cost. It could be the same length, but the cost could be widely different. So the council would have to consider that portion of it anyway, of what the cost share is. We didn't make it a percent. We tried to make it a flat fee. So the homeowners, when they applied, they kind of had some certainty, if you will. So trying to take some risk out for the homeowner side, and and that just puts more on the city, of course. But anyway, that's what we tried to do.
When you said you took the language out from the sidewalk, does that include that discretionary language in D? That's not in the sidewalk?
No, it's a flat fee.
It's just a flat, there's not a process
it's-
to appeal.
Right, and we weren't overrun with this in sidewalks. Now, we had a rash about 3 or 4 in a row in the kind of the same general area of town. But, once we got into that, we found out the homeowners' participation was very low, because you start building, it sounds easy to build the sidewalk, but then you got bad curb and gutter, so you gotta replace that. And then you gotta move this fence, and you gotta do that, and then you gotta work with the grade so that it doesn't wash water back at their house and things like that. And so they became very expensive projects, with the homeowners only contributing a very small amount. And I suspect this would be the same, just up front, that, like I said, we get into these, you can look at Douglas Davis project, and, and if you go through that and see how many homeowners are affected and the length of that, it's pretty extensive amount of money. And so, at that time, the city council had to actually appropriate money just for that project individually. And so that there was a lot of discretion there, whether they're going to do it or not. And so there was a lot of discussion through the budget process about those, and certain councilmen would advocate for this one, maybe it's in their ward or whatever. But anyway, all that came to play anyway. So I don't know if that helps or muddies the water, but it's the only vehicle we could figure out to kind of have something in code to try to address it.
Councilman Spencer?
Well, and Ryan, I do appreciate you being, forward-thinking on some of what might be a pitfall for a new program. I agree with, and I appreciate that. I guess, though, the mindset of that, though, that say, well, we're kind of choosing, if your project has merit or not. But I guess I'd use that same mindset, if you will, for like when people come for TIFs or any other, deferment of taxes. So, it is the council's responsibility ultimately to make those judgments. And so, I guess I'm still somewhat comfortable with the approach we're taking. But, what would it look like if we did it on what your recommendation is as we have a filing period, I guess, from open to close. And there's certain dollars available. Then the homeowner would submit their project. We have them pay a baseline fee possibly, but then the rest of those dollars for that project comes out of that fund. I mean, is that something that would be a little bit, instead of, would, I mean, does anybody else have any concerns or questions about this? Yeah, am I making myself clear with that approach?
And I don't want to say that this is a wrong approach. It's not a wrong approach. It's just, this is a unique approach, and so I felt compelled to say, well, here's some potential forward-looking problems. And not to say that the other approach wouldn't have problems as well. You know, you could end up funding projects that maybe have less merit than other projects because someone got their application in late, or, you know, whatever that may be. There's certainly pros and cons to each approach. It's just, on the discretionary side, the more discretion you have, the more opportunities there are for disagreement. So I don't want to sway. It seemed like I'm trying to, you know, put my thumb down on one way or the other. It's just, I felt you need to inform the committee of one particular issue that I see.
Currently, we don't have anything in place, which led us to this point. And I think staff has put together a document. We asked them to add a section, which they have done. Do we feel comfortable maybe taking that back out and allowing the process to work, or are we set on the fact that we want some kind of language around Section D?
And if I could make a suggestion, you know, perhaps some ameliorating language could be something to the effect that, you know, the city council will have no obligation to fund any project if there's not sufficient, you know, money appropriated for the program. So basically, once we get to zero, we're at zero. Now, it doesn't mean the city council can't do some sort of supplemental appropriation, put money back in the program, but if you come in and the project your fund is at zero, then you don't get your project. You know, so that way it's not a unending entitlement, you know, that the city council is obligated itself to fund.
But that would be the case whether we leave this discretionary language.
That would be the case probably either way. I think it's probably a good approach.
Mr. Moresh?
Sorry to, again, I was reading
Nope.
this more closely, the first article, in light of our, Ryan and I had we're being sued on a couple stormwater issues. And I'm looking at the first paragraph, we say private stormwater systems, which is the terminology we use in these lawsuits, for open channels and various things. So I don't know if that causes any problem, Ryan, because, you know, I'm just, you know, so we're in a lawsuit. You know, I'm careful about how I reference things, and I use that term there a lot, even on open channels and things like that.
No, I don't think I have any problem with that
Okay,
terminology.
just making sure. I forgot to mention that.
All right, well, what is the pleasure of the committee? Councilman Spencer.
And I hate to do this to staff because I was, again, at our last meeting at that, my request of adding this additional language. Could we would it be appropriate to, have you seen the full document, Ryan, of the proposed program? I mean, have you had time to really digest it, or?
Yeah, I've taken a look at it. Yeah.
Okay, so you're comfortable with
Yeah.
that, except for the appeal process? Is there another term that we could use where we would?
Well, it's so it's not an appeal. So appeals happen after the decision. What I think you're describing is more of a pre-decision recommendation. If I'm picking up what you're trying to describe here, is we want this to come to the committee first before it comes to the city council, so that way the city council has the benefit of the committee's input before a decision is made.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can do that. We just kind of have to figure out the mechanics of it and what that would look like and how much process is due for that type of situation. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having an additional step. It's just ultimately the challengeable decision will be the city council decision. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just kind of another piece of machinery that we have to figure out.
Well, I don't think my motion has garnered a second anyway, so if there is no second, then that additional language.
And there's certainly nothing that would prevent Public Works staff from bringing it to the committee for consideration, like we do other types of projects. It's just when you formalize that, then there is an amount of formality that has to attach to that. And when you have those formal processes, that's when you open it up for disagreement.
Thank you.
So we're back to the original document that still contains item D under section 31-283. So you're saying you're comfortable leaving that in?
It works. I don't want to say that it doesn't work. It's just a kind of, this is something that someone could bring issue with in some way. So I'm comfortable with it. We can figure it out. It's just chances at some point in time we're going to have to defend decision on whether or not to increase a project, and that's fine. You know, that's completely fine. I mean, Councilman Spencer hit it in the head. You guys' job is to make tough decisions, and that's completely fine. I'm not uncomfortable with it. It's just this is an area that I think it's appropriate for the committee to know about before we proceed on.
And then do we need to add the language in regard to depletion of funds? And
I think it's a helpful addition. It's a little self-explanatory. You could probably get there anyway if you had to defend this ordinance in court, but I think it's a helpful addition. If the council or the committee wants to do that, I would recommend some sort of language that basically says what the funds are gone, they're gone.
that's not implied in our budget language?
It is implied. What I'm
You think
saying,
it'd be-
what I'm saying is that to make it explicit is probably helpful. So that way it's not, this isn't an entitlement program. This is a very set in stone, concrete program that once the money's gone, it's gone.
Do you have that language, or is that
It'd be
something
very,
you-
very easy to draft up. It would say something to the extent that the council has no obligation to fund any project if there isn't sufficient money appropriated for the project. For the program, probably be the better way to do it.
We've held this project up. If we're gonna push it forward, does the committee feel comfortable moving it forward with that language added as this goes to the council?
With an additional, with maybe him having an opportunity, his staff to review it before it comes to the full body of the council and,
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm sure that was
I have
already a
to
layer.
sign every ordinance, so,
Okay.
yeah, it'll get reviewed.
And real quick, Chairman, if I may,
Sure.
for this program, we do have and this is for Ms. Sheila in finance, we already have a line item because the council has passed a preliminary, we already have some dollars in this plan with ARPA funds dedicated to it. So do we have a line item called?
If you're referring to the ARPA funds, that is in a separate department designated specifically for ARPA. So we would need to make a new account or utilize a different account than what we already have utilizing the ARPA funds. That's not a problem to set up a new account to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, does someone feel comfortable making a motion that we proceed with this with the additional language being added.
I make a motion that we send this on to, for, in recognition of the additional language, to eventually be brought forth to the full council.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Anything else from staff? All in favor, say aye. 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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. Thanks for all the work on this project. I think we go right back to you, Mr. Melvin, on utilities.
Thanks. So, at the last meeting, we kind of discussed the regulation of public utilities, and my comment was, if there's areas of, if we're coming up with a theme of where we're finding problems with this work in the rights of way by the public utilities, that could be a situation where it might be appropriate for the city council to entertain some regulation. In particular, in looking at this, and it's amazing how things pop up when you talk about them, is the issue of companies leaving their lines out in the street. That is definitely a theme that we have been seeing, especially in the last 2 years. And so the thing I wanted to discuss is, does the council want to see a draft ordinance that regulates that in a fairly significant way? We're thinking about, my recommendation would be something along the lines of a notification to Public Works so that we know where this is happening, a time limit so it can't happen for more than a reasonable amount of time. We'll try to figure out what a reasonable amount of time is. Some standards that go along with that. You've seen, the essentially temporary speed bumps, that go along with it. I've seen them just spread out across the road. There doesn't seem to be any design that goes, or intention that goes along with this. So I would say some standards on how to do this appropriately would be appropriate, but we didn't want to get into drafting if that was not something that the committee wanted to get into. So this is really just kind of a staff looking for input. Is this something that you guys are interested in? Because it's certainly appearing as a problem for us, presenting itself as an issue that the citizens are bringing to staff, myself and Public Works I know of. And is that something that you guys want to see some draft language on and figure out a better way to do this?
Comments?
I say yes, definitely.
Councilman Schreiber?
Yes, I think based on the issues that we've addressed and some comments that we've had from various constituents in our specific areas, that this has been a problem, and I think that we do need to have a draft of an ordinance that'll help alleviate the problem and give the utility companies a reasonable amount of time, but not drag it out.
Yeah, it's and part of the process, what we would anticipate is reaching out to the various companies, and I don't know if I'd go so far as to say to get their input, but to at least let them know and let them make their case of why why they do this and what they would like to see in some sort of regulation. But I do think this is probably an appropriate place of regulation. If the committee deems fit, I think staff probably agrees as well.
Councilman Spencer?
And I assume a fine will be associated with your vision of an ordinance?
Yeah. Fines are, in this type of situation, the ability to do municipal fines can sometimes be wrapped into the cost of doing business just because of limitations on how much we can fine. I think we would probably couple that with some more creative approaches.
I think there has to be some kind of financial incentive, and it has to be severe so that we send our message clear and efficiently as possible. So,
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Morash?
Yeah, and certainly right now we're deluged with a lot of fiber jobs all over town, cable, et cetera. various things in the right of way. So, you know, one of the issues is like whack-a-mole almost, because we have one inspector that it tries to do the whole town. So really the staffing of this is not robust at this point. We do try to supplement with a street worker occasionally, but that gentleman also has a job, you know, working on a construction crew. So, you know, if we're gonna be a little more forward, lean into this, we'd probably need to look at even shifting a position from a worker to like a right-of-way inspector or something full-time would be my recommendation too. I mean, once we find them, sometimes, you know, certainly if we have regulations and we say, don't do this, don't do that, but if nobody's following up with them, then, you know, we find this difficult to police already, even with the people we have, so. And even when we know the job is going on, then we have difficulties as well, you know, kind of keeping track of them because they're allowed to do certain things in the right of way. You know, I was telling you yesterday, Councilman, that about a fiber job that has not went the best here lately just because of the rock underground, and no fault of the contractor really, it's just that he should have recognized it quicker, and so now we're in a dispute about what needs fixed and what doesn't need fixed.
Councilman?
And I guess, you know, if we do our job as not only the council, but as a city as a whole, that we, you know, educate the public to this as well, because I think what I would envision is that the public is kind of our self-policing, or, you know, policing these, because, I mean, we get the calls, so they're well aware. They just don't know the process and if, you know, how to go about to remedy it. So I'm not, I mean, obviously, I guess as it goes forward, we can definitely look at staffing, but from its initial rollout, I can see that the public kind of self-polices this themselves, so.
Mr. Smith?
Just Ryan's specific point in reference to, you know, lines across the road, those are the ones that we honestly don't hear about until they're been out there and they smell pretty bad. I mean, when I say that, I'm talking about they've been there for months before people, because, you know, people are generally understanding that, okay, yeah, my neighbor's internet's out, they laid a line across my yard, they laid a line across the street, you know, they'll be back next week. And then next week turns into next month, et cetera, et cetera. So the problem is we see these, and we don't have any notification that has taken place at all. And there's 250 miles of road in town. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that's we'd like to be much more proactive where it doesn't get where it's smelling bad, you know, and that's the hope. And staffing is a real issue with that.
Well, couldn't that be rolled into the Planning and Protective Services staff person that goes around on complaints with yard heights and those kinds of issues? I mean,
certainly as they go out there, if they're educated about what to observe, they can certainly report that back to Public Works or issue some sort of work order or become part of the process. Certainly, they do drive every street at least 3 times a year as part of our inspection program. So they are out there periodically every street.
again, I think if we tell the public, hey, this is the new standard, it's just like anything else. If you see a problem, please report it, and you report it to this number and all that. I think we just still have a major role in educating the public about this, because I think what our first line of or response is, well, there is no necessary ordinance to regulate that. At least that's my first response. But I will try to contact, you know, the company to see within their construction division, and they're generally pretty responsive. But that's just a direct call that I have to make to the company themselves. So, thank you.
Well, sounds like you've got the direction that the committee would like to see something come back in regard to the staffing. We're probably outside our guardrails. I mean, we've got to depend on our staff to give us indication of how we enforce these things. But as far as putting the ordinance together, I think we've been clear that we'd like to see something, and then we'll address the other pieces as we move forward.
Yep, we'll prepare some for the committee's consideration.
Okay. Takes us to item 4, MoDOT. Mr. Bangy, talking about roads.
Yes.
New roads.
Yeah. So last month at the meeting, we had a representative from MoDOT come and talk about the plans that are being developed for the widening of Highway 5063 or 5463 on the north side of the river, basically by the addition of a lane in each direction, which would kind of remove some of the weaving movements and some of the traffic snarls if you're coming certainly in the morning. Highway 63 would have a dedicated lane that comes all the way across the bridge, and similarly, there would be an additional lane put on the bridge going northbound, eastbound to get you across, so that would help free up some time in the evening. So a great project. We really think that's going to help some of the traffic issues as you cross the bridge. And so the one issue that we do have with the plans that they presented is that they were in their preferred option. We're looking at the removal of the ramp from Highway W, Cedar City Drive, onto southbound, westbound 5463 that would come across the bridge. And so ultimately what that would mean is if I was, say, for instance, at the airport or MFA or any of the soccer fields or otherwise on that side of the river, trying to get back into Jefferson City, I would have to go basically northbound on 54 up to the 63 interchange and then go through both cloverleaf ramps to get myself turned around to come back into the city. And so while it's not a huge distance, it's about 1.5 miles, maybe a little bit more depending on where you're coming from, it is confusing, I would think, for someone who's unfamiliar with what the situation is there. To reach the city, particularly if we talk about people who are flying into our airport, perhaps for the first time, and trying to reach the city. And certainly there's some heavy industrial activities over there, the sand plant, asphalt plant, and requiring those trucks to make that movement through those cloverleaf ramps. Certainly we seem to think that that's going to be a little bit undesirable, and certainly is going to add time and cost to those trips for them. So what I've done is prepared a resolution that we're looking for the committee to endorse and send to the council that basically makes those statements that, because of the additional distance, because of the confusion in traffic, because of the financial implications of all that, we really can't support the removal of that ramp. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think there was direction made from the Airport Advisory Committee that we support this. I know the Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee has been in opposition to the removal of that ramp, so I think they were in the process of sending a letter. So this has garnered a lot of frustration from other groups, and I know the MoDOT rep that was at the meeting was basically just delivering the message. I think he was inundated with information to take back to MoDOT, but there was a unanimous opposition to removal of that ramp. So, I think this is just a step from that process, asking us to do it more formally. Councilman Spencer.
Yeah, and I would second or agree with that motion to support that. But I had spoken to a gentleman, and he made me aware of that this week, October 14th, from 10 to noon, is a stakeholders meeting. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we can get as many people that would be affected by that industry-wise to be at that meeting, and I'm going to try to attend myself. So, because I think this would really hurt, much like who you already made aware. So, this is a big deal. So, thank you for your work on it.
Mr. Marash?
And we have communicated from a staff level as well that, there's opposition there, and we just wanted to make it a little more formal from our council. It'd carry more weight, we feel like.
Someone want to move the approval of this item?
I'll move
I'll second.
approval.
Councilman, thank you, Councilman. Any other discussion?
Just wondering, is the county going to do a similar resolution? Has somebody reached out to the county?
There,
I don't know specifically. I do know that one of the councilmen from Callaway County was present at one of our Campo meetings and was expressing his concern about it. I don't know if they're planning on taking a formal action or not, but we could certainly ask them.
they're certainly represented on that Chamber Transportation Committee. I think they're all in unison. I don't know if they're gonna do anything formal.
I
But-
suggested
but
to
Callaway,
our counterparts at the county that maybe they want to bring that up with their commission. So we did suggest it, but I can follow back up.
good
See-
point, though. All right, we got a motion on the table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Item 5, biosolids. Mr. Seaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have this biosolids project. It was a high priority with a bond issue, and it's very expensive price tag, about $11 million. And looking at inflation and a lot of the challenges we'll have in the future, staff would like to go ahead with a progressive design build approach to this. So in that, we would end up in spring of next year with both a design for the project and a guaranteed construction cost. And with that cost, we could actually go to DNR and close on a loan, and we would have better cash flow. This process would also allow us to have an off-ramp, and we could take that design and bid it if we so chose to do so. But the progressive design build has been successful for other projects like this. For example, the Missouri American did that for their Clearwell and plant upgrade on Main Street here a few years ago. So both the owner, Missouri American, and DNR were satisfied with the results. So we would like to do this. We know, especially if we start expending a lot of money in 2024, we'll be up against all the ARPA projects as well. So we think this is the best way to manage risk and avoid more inflationary pressure.
Well, I think we've had a philosophy of trying to address problems when they're presented. What do you need from us today, or is this something you would bring back to us, a more detailed?
Well, what we'll come forward with is a contract for a progressive design build, and then we'll also, based on that, then a loan closing with Department of Natural Resources will be 2 major items.
At a council level.
Any comments or questions from the committee? All right, I appreciate you bringing this forward, and we'll look forward to the more detailed report. Thanks. Home-based businesses, Mr. Barron, Representative Lavoska sent us a present this year.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I asked this to be placed on the agenda largely as an informational item. Certainly welcome any feedback there might be on it. So the state legislature has passed and the governor signed some changes in state law regarding home-based businesses and cities' abilities to regulate such businesses. Now, first, I'll point out that home-based businesses are regulated through the Jefferson City Zoning Code. There's a section in the zoning code that regulates, we call them home occupations. In your packet is a copy of both changes in sections of the state law, so what was passed by the legislature. It was in 2 different chapters of the Missouri Revised Statutes. And then behind that, an excerpt of the Jefferson City Zoning Code regulations regarding home occupations. So the written form of those 3 items is there in your packet. Some of the regulations in our zoning code, they permit limited home-based businesses. and have a number of conditions, I'll call them, on those types of businesses. First, that they can only be operated by the resident of the home. You can't have outside employees coming to the home, and certainly can't set up a business in a home that you don't live in. There's a limit on the scale or the floor area that could be devoted to such a business. Conditions on any kind of mechanized equipment, especially as it relates to any noise and things like that. Conditions on vehicles and storage. Some of the main things, though, that come up the most often is that customer and client contact cannot take place at the home, and employees cannot be reporting to the home. And there's actually a list of prohibited home occupations, so a specific list of types of businesses that are not permissible as a home occupation. Some of those include, we call them personal services, things like hair salons, massage therapy, things like counseling, medical offices, certainly repair shops for appliances, computers, and motor vehicles, and photography studios. In all, we process about 30 home-based business licenses a year by issuing a zoning permit called a home occupation permit, and then also a business license for that business. And I'll state, just kind of in general, we do get a lot of inquiries and types of businesses that are not permissible in a home. People that might be wanting to start one of those things I just mentioned, be it a massage therapy or personal service type business. And, of course, we have to inform them that it's not permitted. We also get an awful lot of complaints on business activities in residential areas when they occur, whether it be something that's permissible or something that is taking place that's prohibited and we have to act on in an enforcement manner. So this new state law went into effect. There's an effective date on the printed material there, 28th of August. And so it is in effect right now. I'll try to summarize it. Essentially, it limits cities' abilities to restrict home-based businesses. It defines what's called a no-impact home-based business, and essentially states that those types of businesses cannot be regulated outside of very narrowly tailored regulations, primarily pertaining to things like safety, fire and building codes, health, traffic, hazardous waste, noise. It calls out that businesses, or that the cities cannot prohibit service by appointment, and I believe what that means is arranging appointments with customers and them coming to your home. Something that's currently prohibited by our zoning regulations. And then also the state law states that cities cannot prohibit specific occupations. We of course have a list in our code that are prohibited. And so staff are going to be preparing amendments to the city code and our application processes, the process where a business license or home-based business would be applied for in response to these new state laws, primarily to remove those conflicting items and to define the areas where we do have some ability to regulate. There's some vague references within the code regarding excessive traffic, and so we have to establish what that means. And we think we have some ability at the local level to do that. I'll state that I believe that all normal city codes, all existing city codes pertaining to things like building codes, fire codes, health, and property maintenance codes are still apply. So this language doesn't necessarily get a homeowner, or someone that's wanting to start a business and out in these other adopted codes. You can't start up a restaurant in your house because you wouldn't be able to meet the health code unless you can. And then also, as I mentioned, it's primarily, I think, one area, the traffic and parking need to be defined. So that's one specific area that we need to outline with any amendment on what the parking requirements for a home-based business would be, and then what excessive traffic might be considered. So these amendments would go through the Planning and Zoning Commission as amendments to the zoning code, and then on to City Council for final approval. I'll point out that because the law is currently in effect, that state law, we're really not in a position to deny an application for a home-based business that can be proven to meet that law. Might lean on the law department a little bit, in terms of what that might mean, but essentially what I'm stating is that there are some businesses out there that we're in a situation where we really need to approve that would otherwise be in conflict with our zoning code as it stands.
Have you been approached by anybody yet?
You know, it's businesses that, I don't think they were aware of the changes in the state law. They were just applying for a business. In a normal situation, we would have issued them a denial letter. And we're really not in a position to do that right now.
So, Eric hit all the highlights, but I just kind of want to introduce the subtlety that I think is in here. This is a sea change on how we regulate home-based businesses. And once these things kind of come into place, you guys are going to get calls about it. And so just kind of will give you guys fair warning, because, you know, like in particular, one provision says that you can't run a home-based businesses where the business activity can be viewed from the right-of-way. But it doesn't say anything about your neighbor's upstairs window. And so if you can keep all the cars that you're working on behind a fence and, you know, and appropriately parked on appropriate surfaces, it doesn't matter that your neighbor can see it. And, you know, the neighbor just has to suffer that. So maybe an extreme example, but I think probably an enlightening one. And so you guys are going to get calls on it. And I do believe that the Municipal League is working on toning down some of this language, because there's some pretty extreme implications that could come from this. And so I think it's one of the priorities of the Municipal League to help maybe rework this a little bit in a way that is a little bit more workable and has more explicit references to where we can regulate as opposed to these implied references. And so it may be a little bit of a moving target. And so I guess what I'm saying is not to throw the General Assembly under the bus, but if you guys are getting calls and complaints, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And I suggest that one thing that you can tell the constituents that have problems with this is call your state representative, call your state senator, because essentially the General Assembly has gotten the city out of the business of regulating these local zoning issues. This is going to be an issue, and it's going to be an issue for several years, I think. And so then there's not a whole lot that we can do about it at a staff level. It's just kind of one of these areas where the state has deemed it appropriate to preempt city regulation for the most part. We're gonna figure out the areas we can operate, and we're gonna operate to protect our neighborhoods and our residents, and still provide fair opportunity for people to do appropriate businesses in their home. But the tools in our toolbox have been greatly depleted to help the neighbors that are impacted by these home-based businesses. Most of them are run responsibly and without a whole lot of impact in the neighborhood, but this opens up the opportunity for more impactful type of operations.
Well, the fact that he was able to bird dog it through a dysfunctional year like 2022 means there was a lot of support for it. So it will be fascinating to see what they're able to do to leverage it, because they weren't able to leverage it a whole lot in this session. But I agree. I mean, we're going to have to do what we have to do as a city. Comments or questions, Councilman Spencer?
Yeah, and for full disclosure, I'm a benefactor of home-based business. I mean, and we've been in business for over 25 years. I think we've been a good, responsible neighbor in doing so. But I guess my concern and my critique of this whole process as far as on the state level would be is that they've taken away local control. And I think that's the big argument for me, is that we no longer have local control. And so hopefully that could be revisited, and with some needed support from the Municipal League that can maybe supply some reinforcement in that as well. So thank you, and I appreciate you as staff being preemptive on explaining some of these pitfalls, if you will. So thank you again.
All right. Seeing no other comments, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 7, rental inspection program, Councilman Lester.
So I'm going to talk about the need for reoccurring rental inspection, a program that includes review of the inside of rental units. The intent of rental property regulation is to foster safe, livable residential neighborhoods. My intent today is to restart a discussion about our inspection program for residential rentals in Jefferson City. Is to discuss having an appropriate level and intensity and comprehensiveness of regulatory inspection to achieve that stated goal of to have and foster safe, livable residential neighborhoods, while at the same time to not create a system so onerous as to discourage a very much needed increase in business development of residential rental units. 3 years ago, in 2019, I appeared before this body as a private citizen to urge this same action. Much of my testimony today will be similar. A month before my testimony in 2019, the city had issued a 63-page dangerous building summary to the owners of Heritage Apartments. That's a 72-unit apartment complex in my neighborhood. In that report, they detailed the unsanitary and unsafe conditions in which tenants were living. That was one of the motivators for me to speak and advocate for more rigorous inspection, thinking that our inspection program prior to that point had not been rigorous enough to prevent conditions that existed at Heritage to threaten their being totally shut down. So here we are 3 years later in 2022, and the city has just last month issued a 62-page notice of dangerous building and order to abate to the owner of Heritage Apartments. So I'm here again to advocate to improve our inspection of rental properties program and to try to prevent the reoccurrence of these kind of safety and health living conditions. You might have noticed I'm kind of old. A single advantage of being older, you have time for many different experiences. So I've been on both sides of this tenant-landlord divide. For much of my adult life, I've been a renter. More than 35 years ago, my family and I were evicted. At the time, it was a time when I was just out of graduate school and my first job, and we had 4 children, and we rented what was available and affordable, and it was very substandard housing. And when those landlords, after the initial contract ran out and they raised our rent, I just told them the conditions that they wouldn't fix up. I wasn't going to pay any more. I'd keep paying what I was paying, and so we got evicted. That was in Maryland and Salisbury. And to the city council's credit, I took that issue to them, and they inspected that property, and they condemned that property as well as the one next to it. It was owned by the same Baltimore City lawyers, absentee landlords. But so I've had that experience. Those who attended that 3 years ago that know from my wife's comments, she was quite irritated with me nevertheless that I'd gotten us evicted. That's quite worrisome to have 4 children and face homelessness. But anyway, I had a co-worker that had a house that we were available, was available, and we moved into that. So 20 years later, here in Jefferson City, I was a landlord. I had a number of properties. And during that decade of being a landlord, I did have to evict one of the tenants for illegal drug activity and non-payment of rent. I had other tenants that were excellent, but when they moved out, they found a house to buy. I discovered there was a water leak, and they hadn't told me about it. I wish they had. I don't know why they didn't. If they told me about it much earlier, it would have been much less expensive to repair. So I've had these different experiences. I am sympathetic to the challenges that landlords face. They provide a necessary service, but it's a business, and we don't want to make it overly burdensome through regulation. And I also think that most of the problems, like most of these type of population problems, are caused by maybe a small subset of the population. And I think most landlords in Jefferson City try to do right by their tenants, but I know that from experience, I know that there are many that do not. My granddaughter with her 8-year-old just recently moved back to Jefferson City from New York State. She found an affordable rental online and paid her deposit and first month's rent. But when she tried to move in, it was infested with roaches, and the plumbing didn't work. Anytime she flushed the toilet, it overflowed. It ruined some of the few bits of property that she moved in. She never spent any time in that apartment because she couldn't. And yet, when she tried to get her money back, that was refused. She had to threaten to take the landlord to small claims court. By the way, that was not Heritage Apartments. It was other apartment complex here in Jefferson City. So, to me, these problems would be avoided if we had a more rigorous, reoccurring inspection program, one that periodically reviewed the inside of rental units in addition to just the exterior and public areas. I think it could be set up in a way to acknowledge those landlords who have a documented property maintenance program and a good community reputation, such that their frequency of their required inspections would be less. Here's what I'm requesting. I ask that the staff review other city rental inspection programs that include periodic reviews of the inside of rental units, and that they inform us at a follow-up meeting the details of programs that seem to have been successful, and to inform us of what additional resources would be required to implement such an enhanced inspection program in Jefferson City. So I think having such a program would take care of these problems, and if we don't have that, we're going to keep facing these situations like we have at Heritage Apartments, where we discover people are living in dangerous conditions, and it just shouldn't happen in our city. So.
All right, well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think we had brief discussion on that when we went through the low-income housing tax credit discussions and what's required of those projects versus what's required in the private marketplace. So I think it's a legitimate question to ask. I guess I need a little guidance on what would be the process from here to begin trying to put together what might be something to come back to the committee.
Sir, oh, sorry.
I don't know. Mr. Sanders.
Okay, sorry. Certainly we can brush off our research we did a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and take a look at what the situation is now and put together sort of a what are other cities doing and what are some of the pitfalls, pros and cons of each type of inspection program. I do know there are tiers of inspection programs all the way from every year we're going to go in, or every tenant change we're going to go in. I have seen some models where it may start out somewhere baseline where everybody takes a look, but then there's metrics that identify bad players that get more reoccurring inspections, and those that never have any issues, they'll never see us again. So there's a whole plethora of things that are out there working in other cities and other states. They do have other state laws too. So I'm sure Ryan is a little familiar with these things, but I've been to some educational seminars, and I know Dave is really up on this too. So I think in the next month or two, we could probably get you back a report and presentation on what's going on out there in other communities.
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak for the councilman, but to me it seems like let's do it right. So if it takes more than a month, I mean, let's bring back something. I mean, I think I made the comment, you never want to look at government as being the solution to the problem, but if the industry doesn't self-police itself, sometimes about the only thing we can do is try to come in with, a plan that you discussed, that if you want to cooperate, here's an easy way to do it. If not, we've got to protect the tenants, as the councilman indicated. So, to me, again, I'd like not to see it drag out 6 months, but a month seems pretty aggressive, especially going into the holiday time. Let's do it right and come back with something that we can get public input on. I'm sure we're going to get input from some of the individuals that might fall in that category, so that we have a good discussion and see where we can go as a city. Any other comments, questions? Councilman Spencer.
Yeah, and I appreciate you, your passion on that issue, because I think all of us agree on the council that everyone deserves to live in a safe, healthy environment. And, we fought a fire a number of years ago off Duncan Street in an apartment complex where people were hanging from the windowsills, because that apartment complex was in bad condition. We could have lost several lives that night. So I appreciate your effort in trying to avoid a situation like that. But you mentioned Heritage Apartments. I think it's also, we have to look at, to kind of run the string out, if you will, of if there is a complex that is in that bad a shape, how are we going to remedy that? Is there something ordinance-wise to where we can shut that place down, but at the owner's expense, it is their responsibility to house them until those hazards are remedied? Because it's really puts people in a bad position to, now we're getting 60, 70 people out of an apartment complex, and there's no place for them to go because they can't afford to be housed in a hotel for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The city sure can't afford to fit that bill, but unless we put an abatement process to it or something to where the city will do that, because it's such an emergency measure that we will do that, but then we're coming back to get, our costs back. So, I'd like to look at it from some kind of standpoint that there is a plan and a process in place that we can look to and say, okay, we're going to be enforcing this from this perspective, and we got this plan in place to do that.
That is one of the concerns that we have as staff, is when we have to declare a building dangerous or uninhabitable, is what happens to the residents. So some sort of addressing that issue would certainly help staff and the citizens, the people that are renting there, in terms of not having such stress and angst during a time of.
Because a whole nother layer to that is that, we would love for the tenants to be able to call and inform, but they're very afraid to do that. And so we got to kind of balance the scale in some regard of having that tenant-landlord relationship. I would love to eliminate what we call the slum landlords in this town. We're a size that we should be, of a community that we should be able to do that. And I know there's the Housing Task Force, and they've had a lot of discussion on a whole list of issues, application fees, those kinds of things, which I fully support as well. But again, I just want us to have that forward-thinking mindset of, okay, if we do close down an apartment complex, where are these folks going to go? And so, just my 2 cents. Thank you.
We'll take more time and effort in trying to come up with maybe a holistic, not just here's the issue, here's a problem that we can solve, but that generates other problems. We'll try to take a more broad-based approach at looking at the issues that have been discussed.
Other comments? Again, thanks for raising that issue. All right, item 8. We get Ms. Senzi on the agenda up, not the last, although you do have the last item, but you get in the middle of the agenda too.
Save
Welcome.
the best for last.
Absolutely. You're gonna
Okay.
bring us up to date on MSP.
Yes. First, I've got to turn on my mouse. She told me not to turn on the mouse. Okay. First, if she wouldn't mind pulling up the website first and making sure that we can share it. I'm going to give an overall update on MSP and the redevelopment, and not just from the city's perspective, but the whole perspective, because there's a lot of collaboration with the state of Missouri, as well as, I mean, we have every level of government participating in this site. So there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. The first thing I don't know if my mouse is not on. There we go. The first thing I want to make sure that everybody is aware of is, oops, let's see here. Is the, okay, here we go. I can do this. In the MSP master plan that was adopted by council in 2020, I believe. You can always check on, this is our Jefferson City homepage for the city's website. There is, under news and headlines, is a Missouri State Penitentiary redevelopment. If any of your constituents or you are interested in what's happening, we try to keep this website updated. Right when you click on that, the first thing you're going to pop up is the Missouri State Penitentiary Redevelopment Master Plan. And that master plan, if you recall, was made up from the committee that had city stakeholders, community stakeholders, as well as the state of Missouri stakeholders. And that is the playbook that we are operating by as far as MSP goes. There are some details that change a little bit, especially when the state of Missouri decided to develop there. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows that plan is there, and that's still what we're operating by, even with the changes with the state that has come up. So now I'll go back to my presentation here. Okay. So this is the main overview of MSP and what that redevelopment is going to look like. So we've got, kind of from the city's perspective, we did apply for an economic development administration grant to kind of pave the way for the infrastructure. The infrastructure is tied to, or that grant is tied to the job creation that is going to be created by the hotel, which will go right here, and the conference center, which will be right here. So the EDA grant is supporting this street, as well as this street, and then the pad sites for this development. Just an overview. What has happened recently is that the state of Missouri has decided to do that comprehensive, are they still calling it the One Health Lab? Yep. And they did put out renderings, and I can provide that for you all. Sorry, thank you. There's two things. You take one down, pass around. Leftovers can be open for consumption. So here's East Capitol. Here is Chestnut Street. The proposed new One Health Lab. This is the existing state health laboratory. The proposed One Health Lab is going to go right here, and this is supposed to be a parking structure that supports the employees and also is a forensic parking structure for the highway patrol. And then over here would be the city property. These are artist renderings of what it would look like. So this is the existing structure, the existing health lab. This would be the new build, and they'd have a breezeway that would connect the two. And then this is kind of the back side of it. So you see that this is MSP over here, new structure, parking structure, existing health lab. The other thing that has come up is in order to build out some of this new infrastructure is we need to do selective demolition of the site. So far, the state has completed demolition of the Hobby Craft building. That was destroyed almost in total during the 2019 tornado. They're also recently held a pre-bid meeting for the demolition of the gymnasium. Planned city demolitions include Housing Unit 5, the corridor, the J.S. Sullivan Saddle Tree Factory building, and most of the wall. If you, I provided a map. So here is the old Hobbycraft building was located right here. This is the gymnasium that the state just held the pre-bid meeting on to demo. The city, for its infrastructure and to support the hotel and the conference center, is going to demo the Saddle Tree Factory. That's right here. As well as Housing Unit 5. That is the red brick PWA building that's located here. And then there's a corridor that attaches the old admin building to Housing Unit 5, and that's also going to be demoed. So the hotel, if you remember from that previous map I showed you, will be right about here, and then the conference center will be right about here. And then there will be a street that comes in to support both of those. In the master plan, it calls for the majority of the wall to be demoed. And I think when the plan was adopted, I don't know if the public paid attention to the wall, but it's something that we really need to start talking about, because if we're going by the master plan, all of the wall would be demoed except for this piece, and then a little bit off of the front of the Housing Unit 1 or the old admin building. And here's kind of the rendering from the master plan. You could see that the wall is, for the most part, is gone. There is a piece that sticks out here, a little bit here, and then down here, kind of where that, this is Cherry Street. So from Cherry Street all the way down to Chestnut, it stays. There's also a call for, in the master plan, to maintain some of the guard towers to give that MSP feel. So you can see a guard tower here, and then they also kind of put in a little faux guard towers to keep the design element up. And the reason why I'm bringing all the demos up is because for the EDA grant, and any federal dollars that we decide to put in that site, we have to undergo an environmental review process. And a component of that environmental review process also takes into account the adverse effect that takes place on cultural resources. So MSP is considered a National Register eligible site, so we have to undergo an additional process. So I won't say bad news, but the unfortunate is it takes a minute to get it together. The good news is that once we have it in place for the entire site, any other federal dollars that come in, as long as that federal agency will accept it, we won't have to go through this process again. So one of the things that we have to do is, because there's the demos of a historic site, we have to enter into a programmatic agreement, and that's really an agreement between all of the contributing partners to the site that mitigate the loss of cultural resources. Essentially, if you're going to demo a cultural resource, what are you going to do to make up for it? So we have to come up with the terms. We do have somewhat of a draft circulating right now. There's current draft terms in there include recordation, which is essentially official documentation of the site before the demo occurs. That way you always have that record. Public participation, making sure that the community is aware of what is going to be taken and what the community is going to do to mitigate. Design to Secretary of Interior standards. So there is, that is going to be a requirement from the National Park Service. And that's really just making sure that your new construction or any of your rehabilitation it supports the historic site that still remains. Archaeology within the site, reuse of materials. So if we take down the wall, the reuse of those stones or some of the building elements can be used in future construction. Possible interpretation, such as wayside, such as panels, exhibits, photographs, anything that can be educational. Stabilization of specific guard towers, and then also investment in the historic core. And again, this is not something specifically that the city is required to do. We are a contributing partner, so there may be some elements that the city is responsible for and some elements that the state is responsible for, as well as the other contributing partners. And this is all a negotiation, so I'll keep you updated. Once the programmatic agreement is adopted and executed, we will get a notice to proceed from EDA so we can start work. The other thing that we need to work on is the developers agreement. We were hopeful that we could have a developers agreement before council this month, I believe. And we've got a solid draft, but the financing for the hotel has been with interest rates. I don't know how often they run their numbers. So while they're trying to get their finances in order, we are going to shift to other parts of the project that we can keep moving forward. We do believe that the anticipated start date of the infrastructure will occur in spring of '23. And just to remind you again of what that looks like, this was the EDA grant. There is a little bit of, because the state wanted this property for the health lab, and then we needed this property for the hotel and the street. We are working on kind of a land swap agreement with the state of Missouri to make sure that we got all of our real estate ducks in a row.
Yeah, the land swap agreement is done. It's just a matter of doing the transfers. So that's just dotting I's and crossing T's on that one.
Great. So again, the EDA grant, the infrastructure that I'm mentioning is this creation of the extension of Chestnut Street, as well as Street A will probably have to come later once everything gets completed, and then also kind of the development of the pad sites. So really, at its core, the EDA grant project is very simple. It's been hard to get. It's been a heavy lift to get it going because of all the pre-work that we have to do. But once I think a contractor could get on, it's pretty basic work. Build a road, build them a lot. Upcoming funding opportunities is also something that we're looking at. The Community Revitalization Grant through DED using their ARPA funds is open currently, and I believe is due November 15th or maybe at the end of November. It's coming up. The city could apply to fund demolition costs. The demolition costs I also passed around to including asbestos and all the abatement work that needs to be done. For the city's component of it, for the Saddle Tree Factory, Housing Unit 5, the corridor and the wall, the demolition costs as of it was December of 21, so we anticipate those to go up a little bit, is hovering around that $1.5 million mark to demo. The grant does require a 50% match. However, I think the match, we can leverage the construction costs of the hotel and work with the conference center to come up with that match. So I don't think we have to request a supplemental there. There's also the local tourism asset development grant. That's also through DED, through their ARPA funds. The hospitality sector took a big hit during the pandemic, so I think this is something that's targeted. So if we can apply for those funds up to $2.5 million, that may help our hotelier and our potential master developer to come up with contribute to that their financing mechanisms. That also requires a 50% match, and again, the match can be tied to that construction costs. So we might be looking forward to those. With that, and again, we meet with the state on a monthly basis and bring those folks together, and we have weekly meetings with the developer and city staff, and monthly meetings with the state. So there's a lot of parts and pieces. I'd be happy to answer any questions at any time, not just in public meetings. So if you feel like you want to get in the weeds a little bit, or if you have concerns or questions, please reach out and we'll see if we can answer those for you.
I just had two questions. One, my understanding is there may be a long process to finalize whether the wall can come down. Has that clock started, or are we looking at an extended period to get the final approval?
I don't, here, the issue with the wall, is it's in our plan to demo. The state of Missouri has the final say over what happens with the wall. In our last meeting, I think it was like ripping off a Band-Aid because the funding opportunity came open to demo the wall. I think it shocked some people in the room. It was well, here it is. Now, we've been talking about it. Now we're here. And I don't know where that's going to land. We did meet with DNR on a separate meeting. And they kind of indicated that, well, I don't know if we can say to not tear down the wall while we're also not contributing resources to the site. They also, OA has put out, was about to enter into a contract with Strata to look at the historic core of the prison and how you could utilize it. So it may be, if the state is not ready for the demo of the wall, we may have to proceed with that grant opportunity without including the demo of the wall in it. So we can get the other structures down. Because I think everybody's in agreement about the corridor, the Saddle Tree Factory, and Housing Unit 5. But the wall did cause some issues at our last meeting, and what that would look like and how much. And I think that's okay, because before you permanently remove something, you want to make sure that that's fully what you want to do. But it would be a change from what is in the master plan.
And my second question, is the state assisting on some funding for Chestnut Street?
Yes. So as part of the land swap agreement, the state is committed to pay for half of
That's what I was thinking.
but it's essentially a reimbursement. So once the city spends down and completes the project, we hand them a bill for half of the project cost.
All right, we've got our prison expert here, Councilman Schreiber.
I'll just throw out a couple of things that you may have addressed and maybe you haven't. When we originally had the original redevelopment commission, the consideration for the wall, of course, part of the wall collapsed in 2002 on its own. And we knew that was probably going to happen. We knew we were going to be moving to a new prison, so we were ready to be able to address it. But when the redevelopment commission met, the intention was to step down the wall. Are you familiar with what step down means? And since the Convention and Visitor Bureau Tours is a big component, then to totally just eliminate all traces of the wall would be, I think, very detrimental to those tours, particularly on Capitol Avenue and Lafayette, where Tower 2 is up on the corner, across from the old warden's residence. So when we thought about that component, we said, well, what we probably need to do, and certainly the safety issue is a big factor. You don't want one of those rocks landing on somebody, was to step down the wall, keep like Tower 2 at the corner, step the wall down along Lafayette Street headed toward the river. And then to kind of maybe keep the parameter towers at each corner so people would know where the parameters of the institution were. Now, one really important element is Tower 10, and that's down there where the city property is. And of course, the tornado helped us there by going right through the wall. But Tower 10 is very unique because it's the only tower. Have you been inside that tower by any chance?
I have not been inside that tower.
That tower is the only one, and the Redevelopment Commission recognized this, that has a stone staircase on the inside. So it is very unique architecturally, and if at all possible, that tower should be saved, and that element should be saved. So I'm glad the tornado didn't take it. The other thing that I don't know has been addressed is that on the property that was transferred over to the city, the gas chamber's down there. And so the issue's going to be, is the cost of moving that gas chamber shared by both the city and the state? And I've looked at a couple of potential locations where it would probably be out of the way but be very accessible for tours, and it is a major component in the tours. So that's something that's going to have to be added to the cost, and probably part of that cost, if not all of it, will be up to the city, because, of course, the state owns the gas chamber, but it is on the property which we would like to see redevelop, the city property.
Yeah, so, excellent point, and as part of the land swap agreement, the state has committed for paying half of the cost of the relocation. And, you know, the way the site stands now, there's a little bit of a donut hole, where the gas chamber currently exists, that they still own. They still own the real estate there, and so the agreement is that if the state decides to move the gas chamber, and that's part of the contract with, they have with their historical architect, Strata, is doing an evaluation of, well, how much that would cost and what the impact on the historical value of the structure would be if it got moved to another location. So if the state decides to relocate it, the city and the state would split that cost, and then that underlying land would transfer to the city. So that way we can include it in the larger redevelopment. So that has been addressed, and the decision of whether or not to move the gas chamber still remains in the state. But, you know, they have committed that, you know, they would share the cost and then transfer that land back to the city, or to the city, you know, if that were to happen. But that decision is still forthcoming, and they're going to rely on their historical architectural experts to help them make that decision.
Yeah, because that building will just have to be taken down stone by stone and rebuilt. But there are a couple locations fairly close that would be out of the way, so that would work. So, okay, those are the two concerns that I think we need to look at as well. Thank you.
And just to give a brief update on the developers agreement, we are essentially very, very close to coming to final terms on that. Had one hiccup there when the underwriter ran the final model. The increase in construction costs and interest rates presented a little problem on the cash flow. Not to get too many in the details, but there's a concept called coverage when you're using unsecured governmental funds like TIF to help finance. Essentially, you have to raise more money than what you're borrowing as part of the financing deal. And so we are currently working with the underwriter and some new financial advisors to help smooth out that coverage issue and help solve for the increase in interest rates. So something we're currently working on. We're hoping to have a solution fairly quickly. But you know, we were prepared to come to the city council in very short order, and then the underwriter said, let's pump the brakes here. We have one issue to figure out. So it's going to be something that once we figure it out, it's going to come pretty rapidly to the city council. But I apologize for that, but I can't control the Fed. So
Just in the near term, Ryan, are any of the land swaps coming to the council, by the way?
no, the land swaps are done.
Okay.
They've already been approved by the city council.
With the primary health care?
Thank you, Matt. So not really a swap, but just a conveyance.
Well,
so you
just that.
got me a little confused.
I'm sorry.
So we are working with the Primary Care Association in Missouri Behavioral Health Coalition they are interested in building a $20 million facility at the site. They have identified a particular site at the MSP. And we are currently working with the master developer, their architects and engineers, to figure out how that would work and how that would integrate fully into the site. And I am hopeful that we will see some sort of agreement for conveyance of that property here in the near future. But once the state announced the One Health Lab across the street from the city's portion, they became very interested in co-locating with the state with their office building. So pretty exciting opportunity, because between the state and these associations, we're looking at $200 million of investment right there on Chestnut. So
Yeah.
we're looking pretty smart for a $1 million city investment to
Right.
attract that type of investment to downtown Jefferson City.
And so I was just going to mention that, and then secondly, on top of, to follow, that does require some road work on Chestnut, obviously. And so it kind of can follow to a couple tracks potentially You know, there's the development of just the health lab and some of these association buildings that would require some input from us on the road. And the state has agreed to pay for half as well. So we're talking about a couple $100 million of investment. When we did, for example, St. Mary's Healthcare Facility, you know, the new hospital, similar range of input from the developer, and we had to spend, I don't know, 7-8 million back then. And so there may be a need to kind of kickstart that road project ahead of some of this and some of the utility agreements and things like that. So those things could pop up pretty quickly if some of these other things fall in place real quick. Just to give you a heads up, if we pop up to a council meeting, that's what we're doing.
And just to touch base on the financing, the conference center and the infrastructure work is still on the right side of the ledger. So those are no problem with the financing there. So we're just kind of waiting on the hospitality financing. So.
And I think the wall discussion comes up with a proposal from the associations, which is why the question.
Yeah, it does. They don't want to be stuck behind a 30-foot wall. If they're building that type of facility, they want the public to be able to see it and access it, which I think makes a lot of sense.
All right, well, we've still got plenty of agendas, so seeing no other questions, but thank you very much for that update. I mean, I know I get questions periodically. I appreciate you reminding us that there are some details on the website, so, I mean, that's a great asset, but thanks for the update. I think you've got the next two items on the agenda, so we may move to the historic discussions.
I do. I can't see. Okay, so the next item discussion is for the application for Historic Preservation Fund grant to conduct the West Main Phase 3 survey. We actually have already requested this grant, but we had to shift. And I believe we sent out an email. We had 2 HPF grants that unfortunately we had to return. We had a consultant that did not fulfill his contract, so we ended up having to pull the plug. The State Historic Preservation Office was very gracious and allowed us to utilize the grant that we received this year to go back and redo one of the projects. So this year we're simply resubmitting for the 2 that we did not get completed because our timeline got a little bit off. So the one that we were talking about now is the West Main Phase 3 architectural survey. And this would be the areas that would be surveyed for that project. The survey areas are mapped out based off of subdivision. We don't want to break up the subdivision, and also we have to maintain a limit between like 150 to 200 properties is usually a good project bite. So that we, as a city, had committed to surveying West Main in anticipation of putting it on the National Register. One of the reasons why you want to get properties on the National Register is because it opens up tax credit opportunities for property owners to be able to maintain and restore or rehabilitate their properties. It's just one of the things that we can do in advance. So that is the project area for West Main Phase 3. We did, due to time constraints, we did go ahead and put it on the council agenda for Monday, but I would still like, approval from this body to move this grant application forward.
All right, questions, comments, or motion?
Motion to push this to the full council.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any other comments, questions? Mr. Sanders?
Yes, I'd just like to point out the timing of this. Rachel in the past has mentioned that we're really ahead of the grant cycle here. It may not be till fiscal 2024 that we actually request the match for this grant, just due to the timing of the grant cycle. So I'd just like to point that out. That's applicable to the second application too. Rachel's going to talk about.
Yep, that's correct. All these, so everything, and that's the kind of the grant cycle. And we've talked about it. And I think you've heard me say there's a 3-year cycle for grants. So right now is the application phase. We won't find out if we actually receive it until next year. And so then the actual the actual projects gets conducted in FY24. So that's where we would either put it in the budget or request the supplemental at the time of grant acceptance. That's how
So
that works.
could we put a dollar amount like in a holding tank here so that kind of red flags us in our budget process? I mean,
Well, we can, so that it depends on, I mean, I could put it in as a pink sheet for a budget item, or I could do a supplemental at the time of grant acceptance. That's sort of the two, because usually these are on a pretty good cycle. Generally, we get the awards for these in September or October. It kind of depends on when the feds release their bucket of money, and then it trickles down to the state, and the state does their thing and opens it up. So it could do either a pink sheet or a supplemental.
just from a budgeting perspective, I mean, I feel
Right.
like we're committing ourselves to future budgets, you know.
Right. So
for
this
that,
is
so.
just to apply.
Right,
The
but if-
committing would be accepting.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm alluding to, so,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah. And we'll keep you updated on those because it's, a year. A lot happens in a year.
All right, we've got a motion and a second on the table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. We'll move to item 10.
The next is the resurvey of the historic East. And I call it a resurvey. We did survey it in 1992, and the creation of the Capitol Avenue Historic District was created. The reason why we want to resurvey here, and originally when we applied, Simonson was not listed, so that was a concern of mine, but we cut Simonson out. But we also want to look at School Street. We want to look at some of the other commercial properties that are in there, specifically because of the tax credits. And this area was damaged by the tornado, so we want to make sure that we have historic that there's this historic areas that are still intact. So again, same process. This one's a little bit larger. Because of it's way over 150 properties for sure. So this would be a larger contract lift. But again, same timeline. This activity, if funded, would start in 2024.
And you need approval on this one as well.
Please, yes.
Questions, comments, or action?
Motion that we push this to the council as well.
I'll second that.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. I know it doesn't relate to this project, but great article in the paper, I guess Monday or Sunday, with the plaque with Mr. Glover and, Mr. Brown, Glover, and Arthur on the plaque there, very well deserved, so
Yeah. and
thanks
that-
for everybody's work on that.
And that will be, he submitted his application. We're doing a staff level review. It requires 15 days for the public hearing to implement that historic legacy district. So we'll look at it at the next Historic Preservation Commission meeting in November. And I don't anticipate them not approving it, and then it'll go through its cycle to council.
Thanks, appreciate the work. Brings us to item 4, citizens' opportunity to address the committee. I know it's been a long meeting, but Mr. Schaefer-Cutter, would you like to speak to us? I apologize for the time, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us. If you could just identify yourself. I think
Yeah,
we
Jeff
all-
Schaefer-Cutter. My wife and I own the property, the Farber Union Pacific property that's between the fire station number 1 and the railroad tracks. We entered into an agreement with the city on the leveling of that lot, the placement of some of the excess dirt to kind of smooth out or level out areas of the city's property up along High Street, where there was a tree and an old foundation up there, and then also down in the kind of what I call the ravine that was down there. The agreement required us to seed and straw that Union Pacific property as well as the city property that we spread dirt over. And we got that done last Tuesday, I think, and then, of course, the rain. There's some fairly significant rutting in that area now that's coming from Wallway and the city's property up to the north. The water just rolls down that fire station parking lot into Wallway, and we put up some straw to try to stop that from happening. I've got some pictures I could share with staff later on if that's okay. I just want to get this on the city's radar from a staff and a committee perspective, because there's going to be some work that's going to need to be done there to stop that rutting of that area, which is pretty significant. I encourage you to stop by and look at it if you want to, but I just wanted to spend 2 minutes today it's probably been 3 already, but
I don't have a timer, so.
to let you all know that was an issue that we were going to need to be facing.
All right. Any questions, comments? Councilman Spencer?
So is there agreement in the process on how that's going to be remedied from the city in your perspective of the rutting issue of the erosion?
We haven't submitted a PUD plan for that particular piece of ground. It's kind of an additional piece of property that we bought next to the building that we have there on Bolivar Street. So I think that's kind of what I'm looking for. What are we going to need to do? It's going to require some, obviously, cooperation, I think, between us and I think the city on how to handle the water that's coming onto our property from Wallway. So, but certainly willing to talk about that. The stormwater issues there, and these folks know what the stormwater issues are going to be for us there. But we haven't even submitted the PUD plan yet, so I think it's a little early. Frankly, I'd like to have some address to it before it gets to the part where it's a 7-foot ravine that I have to fill back in.
Is there any available product from other jobs that could go to?
Typically, what happens in any development, that once it was disturbed and put the soil on, the developer's required to seed and sod it, stabilize it, et cetera. And I think that was part of the agreement, as I recall.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the water's flowed through there in the past, and we typically have the developer take care of that issue, and the city doesn't normally contribute to that.
And the only thing this particular water is coming from the city's property. Again, exactly the reason I wanted to bring this to the city's attention, so we can start discussing the remediation, if any, that's going to be necessary.
Mr. Kroll?
Yeah, having just been on the property yesterday, I'm not aware of it. Let's let staff have an opportunity to talk and review it and see what we can do. And if we need to come to committee and council, we'll do so.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Ms. Senzi, you're back on the agenda. But I guess, was there anybody else from the public that wanted to make a comment? I'm sorry.
Or online too. I don't know if there's anybody.
Anybody online that wanted to make comment to the committee? All right, I apologize.
It's okay. So this is our monthly grant update of everything that's happening within neighborhood services. We talked in depth about the EDA grant for the MSP infrastructure, so I'll kind of breeze through that and go down to the next one. We do have our normal entitlement funds, our CDBG funds. We do have the Adams Street, Hickory Street sidewalk project that should be starting soon if it hasn't already. We also are required every 5 years to update our impediments for fair housing plan. So we're currently working on the procurement of that plan. We estimate it's going to cost between $30,000 and $40,000. Hopefully we can figure out a way to take it out of our administration for our entitlement. We've got to run the numbers on that and see what happens when we get the bids back. But that is a requirement of the funding. And it does have implementation for, to better address fair housing within the city. Our community development block grant disaster recovery funds, on the next council meeting on Monday, the award is on the agenda for the acceptance of the $7.3 million. I mean, so it's a 100% federal funded. The next steps for that, we do have on the breakdown of the programs. It's all, the entire pot is to address housing recovery from losses sustained during the 2019 tornado. There's multiple programs. The only one that we currently have open is the multifamily program that we went through. And so you had 3 developers apply for the disaster recovery funds. And then they also applied for the low-income housing tax credit. The whole package gets sent to MHDC. There's a staff level review through MHDC, and then it goes on to the MHDC commission for the selection of who gets the tax credits. That we will know probably by November or early December of who is getting the tax credits. We actually had 4 housing developments apply. Simonson did go in and apply for the low-income housing tax credit, but they did not apply for the disaster recovery funds. Once the CDBG-DR and the tax credits are designed to be gap financing, so we're reliant on the MHDC underwriters to tell us how much is required from the DR funds to fund that. So we are putting somewhat of a hold on the other programs until we understand how much money remains after that program, after MHDC makes their selections. I have had a lot of people ask, well, what do we need to do next? Including people that oppose the 3 development projects, as well as people that support the 3 development projects. The next steps are really to submit public comment directly to MHDC. I have had a couple that have come directly to the city, and we have forwarded those on to MHDC for their consideration. There's also a political level. Once it gets to the commission, because the commission is made up of the governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, attorney general, and then other folks that were appointed by the governor throughout the state. If you are a proponent, it doesn't hurt to contact those folks to let them know. I did get somebody that asked, because Joplin had their tornado, also received DR funds, also did a multifamily with the low-income housing tax credit. In 2013, MHDC awarded Joplin 6 low-income housing tax credit projects. So it is possible that Jefferson City could get 4, but I think that legwork would need to be done politically in order for that to happen. And then once we understand the funding that we have remaining, then we'll start unrolling the other programs. Probably one of the first ones that will come out is the homeowner rehabilitation program, as well as the single family new construction. We do have $1 million identified for infrastructure, and we're going to save that to the end because we don't want. That's one of the lessons that we learned from Joplin when we contacted their city staff. They said, "Don't do the infrastructure up front because you're going to tear it up and you're going to have to redo it." So we're going to wait until the end and make sure that we're using this funding and stretching it and layering it with other financial mechanisms as much as possible. The other update is our historic context. That is the HPF grant that we received, and we've been working on that all year. It's still technically in draft status, but it is just about ready for public consumption. So as soon as that gets ready, we'll send it out to the council and put it out on the website so the public can read it. And again, that's a developmental history of Jefferson City, and it identifies some target areas that we should pursue with some of those survey dollars to get them listed on the National Register. And we also have the HPF structural assessment of the properties on Capitol Avenue. That will also have October 19th on there. Keep doing that. It's October 17th is your council meeting. Allstate has completed the assessments. All of those assessments are online. So if you go to, I'll show you again. If you go to the city's website, which I don't know if I'm gonna get. Nope. I'll do this again. If you scroll down to news and headlines, Capitol Avenue plans. And it gives an up-to-date. So here is the ordinance that established for the acquisition and demolition fund. A link to the plan that council requested staff to put together of how that process is going to work. And then you'll have the structural report as well as the cost estimates for stabilization of the structures. So those are all available for the public and for the council. Yep. Yes.
Yeah, and it's so addition to the structural assessments, something else that the city council is going to see for introduction on Monday night is a development plan and blight analysis for the Capitol Avenue area. That was approved by the Jefferson Redevelopment Corporation this week. So I had a little trouble getting it onto this agenda specifically, but it's kind of in conjunction with the structural assessment. So that's a prerequisite to the city's eventual decision to use eminent domain in the acquisition process is the declaration of blight and a approval of the development plan. And essentially the development plan is that the city will acquire the properties and then seek out a competitive bidding process to find redevelopers and execute redevelopment agreements once those developers are identified. But that'll be on the city council agenda for introduction as well.
So how soon can the city, what do we expect in terms of acquiring those properties?
It is my great hope and desire and goal to initiate the condemnation petition before the end of the year. How long that takes to work its way through the court kind of depends on the court. So I think best case scenario is probably 4 or 5 months. Worst case scenario is up to a year. So somewhere in there, I would anticipate acquisitions back of the napkin, best case scenario sometime next summer. There's no such thing as a quick take in Missouri.
Okay. The Paul Bruin Revitalization Grant. We received 6 applications. The Historic Preservation Commission scored those applications and decided there was around a $50,000 gap between being able to fund all of them. So the HPC decided to partially fund all of them. So they just kind of split it across the board, which all of the applicants were pleased about. The next steps include hosting a grant administration workshop, which is October 27th. And at that time, that will be the formal award to the subrecipients. And we're also going to walk them through their projects from start to finish. There are a couple of things that they're a little bit different with accepting federal funds than just doing it privately. So they'll have to undergo a design review process with the National Park Service, as well as making sure that they're following all the procurement laws that are required. And also the environmental reviews for the properties, which the city will conduct on their behalf. State CDBG, the Cole County EMS station, they're still conducting environmental and preparing. We're still working on the admin side of it. The Regional Planning Commission is assisting us on this one. They were somewhat the formal applicants. But we'll keep you posted on that project as well. The state CDBG CV, this is for the transformational housing project. They are also currently in design review in regards to their environmental review for the rehabilitation of 101 Jackson. We did apply for a brownfield grant through DNR, so they have a contractor come in and do asbestos lead inspections and give them a full report of what they need to abate in order to make the property habitable for future tenants. And then they're also in design review, mostly over their doors and windows with the State Historic Preservation Office. Once we get that review done and submitted, we'll get a authority to use grant funds, and then they can also begin their project. Pending applications with the Historic Preservation Fund. We did receive notification that we are going to get these awards. We're just waiting on the paperwork for them. One of them is design guidelines, which is hopefully will go in conjunction with our code revision, which is very close to having a draft of code. And the design guidelines really are a how to do new construction in a historic district, how to do additions, how to basically a playbook for community members on how they can treat their properties and still maintain their historic status. And again, we talked about the West Main Phase 3, the redo. We also talked about the Community Revitalization Grant Program, and this is what we're going to use for MSP demo. There are other grants that are coming up next year that we have to do a lot of work now before we even apply. One of them could be a RAISE grant. And those fund kind of multimodal construction projects. So you could throw in streets, bridges, train stations, bus stations, trails, basically any form of infrastructure that moves people from point A to point B. You can bundle it together. Those are usually open in April of 23. We also have that Choice Neighborhood Planning Grant, and that's the first heavy lift. We'll be getting the community together to apply. And it really takes your housing authority and your neighborhood around it and tries to do transformational things to make it a balanced, mixed income area. But the first step is to apply for the planning grant, which is $500,000 to create a transformation plan. Then once you get that plan in place, you can go for a $50 million implementation. Again, all things bipartisan infrastructure law. There's tons of grants there to help on infrastructure. That is what we are working on, what we got around the corner, and what we're looking at for next year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I know the city is involved with the county on that multimodal project. Will the county be applying for those funds?
So I think the multimodal that you're referencing was funded by EDA. Is it the rail spur? Yeah, the transload facility.
So there's no other.
This would be something that we kind of you almost and that would be a project selection where you take off of your existing and your metropolitan transportation plan. Like pick projects that are already identified in a plan and you bundle them together. There's possibility around it everywhere. One of the things that we've been talking about, and this isn't something that is identified a plan, but just something I've been working on in my head, for MSP, you could do the other bridge connector from Adrian's Island. You could build a train station or a bus or some sort of facility, connect the recreational trails. That's the kind of projects that get funded through that mechanism, is that where you're really making a transformational change to one specific area. I don't think you could pick the viaduct and somewhere off of Ellis, and I don't think you could do that spread out. But if you have a concentrated area of infrastructure, I think that's something that could be successful. Excelsior Springs was awarded one this year. These have traditionally, a lot of times in the past, because they were formerly called Tiger Grants, Build Grants, and now they're RAISE. And they traditionally were somewhat for large cities, large, interstate overpasses and whatnot. But now some of these smaller communities are really starting to get a hold of them successfully. Maryville also received one. So it's not unobtainable. Something that you need to do in the prep work, though, is you kind of need to design ahead of time. You have your design and you have your benefit cost analysis ready to go. And then by the time the application period opens, you just submit. Because you've already planned out your project, you've already identified the resources, you've already done your stakeholder engagement. If you wait until the application period opens, they usually only give you, 60 days. There's no way you're gonna get all your ducks in a row to submit. So that's why you need to do that advance preparation to get ready for it.
The raised grants are really, I think, focused on moving people, as opposed to, the multimodal project is focused on moving goods. And yet, I don't think there's any anticipation that that project isn't going to be able to happen, with the assistance of the EDA grant. So, kind of two different focuses there.
Okay. Councilman Spencer.
So in relationship of the raised grants, I heard you kind of piqued my interest there when you started talking about some trails and connections there. How could we incorporate a marina development on our riverfront for something to tie in with that MSP development or the Deborah Cooper?
I think it's a great idea. The big solution that has to be the big problem that has to be solved for is the railroad. So
We'll just get that taken care of. You can get that done by next week, I'm sure.
David Bangy is excellent at building the railroads.
Well, Mr. Bain, could we expand your passion for bike trails to now marina development?
Oh, absolutely.
Could we have that? Okay. I just think that it has an excellent opportunity there, and so thank you.
And the recipe for anytime you identify something, and I don't know, is a marina in an existing plan?
It's in the state MSP plan, I believe. Councilman Shriver might be able to correct me, but there
Yeah.
was a port, possibly for future, I don't know what the word would be, but donation of a retired military vessel.
No.
I think that's what the plan was.
I remember. So the recipe is get it identified in a plan, because that justifies your need, and it also brings your stakeholders to the group. And then prepare your documents and your design efforts, and then you start just focusing on that, and that's the recipe. But if that's something that you want to focus towards, of course the railroad work, but that is the get it in a plan, then you start your implementation process.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Great report. There's not a new business section on the agenda. I did raise a couple issues with Mr. Moraes yesterday, and I don't know, because of time. I'd raised, just an update quick on where we stand on Monroe Street and where we stand on the viaduct. And we can either do that or we can save it for November. Yeah, if you want to just give us a quick update.
Sure. So we have, as far as the repair goes to the existing High Street viaduct structure in the whole, the contract is back with a contractor for him to sign, and so we're hoping that will be signed and that work can begin relatively quickly. Originally, the contractor had indicated that they could have it done by the end of October. We're a little late in getting the contract to them, or at least later than we thought, so we'll have to see if that still works out. But that's where that part of it stands. In terms of the larger overall design of a new structure, Bartlett and West was selected to be the design consultant for that. We had sent out an RFQ. We had a response from them and another firm. And so Bartlett and West, we actually had a meeting with them yesterday to begin to talk about what we wanted the preliminary scope, or the first phase of that scope, to look like. And so they're developing that. So hopefully we'll have that back in our hands by the 1st of November. And ultimately we'll be bringing that with some discussion, of course, and then ultimately to the council for approval for that contract, for that initial phase of the design. So those are the things that are happening on High Street. As far as Monroe Street goes, our surveyors are currently engaged in doing property research for the properties up near between the hospital back down towards Franklin Street, I believe, because ultimately there'll be some need for right-of-way acquisition along that corridor in order to widen that street. The right-of-way currently, I think, is 40 feet wide there, so certainly there'll be some need for acquisition, and so we're preparing ourselves for that with this property research, and ultimately they'll be going out and beginning a topo survey of that site as well. So that's kind of where we stand with those two projects.
I know we didn't get the CBDG funds for that project. Will there be additional funds that might come up in the future that we might be able to reapply?
I don't have a source identified right now, but with the taking a look at how MoDOT's going to treat some of their money, working through Campo, and then also looking at the bipartisan infrastructure law, because just based off of who owns the road and how it works, there's definitely ability to kind of layer components of it. I can see, CDBG definitely being the ability to pay some of the cost. But I don't have a resource identified right now, but we keep looking, just because that's one of the things that we have identified in the what we would do for the capital improvement sales tax, and then also it's in the South Side neighborhood plan. So just anything that's in those planning documents, we really pull out of. I call it cherry picking. If a funding opportunity comes open, and I know that there's something that would fit nicely out of a plan, so that's what we work on. But we'll keep looking for that one.
Thanks. Any other topics? Councilman Spencer?
Yeah, just real quick, I'll keep it as brief as I possibly can. I just would like to talk about the yard waste issue. I'm just very concerned that during our budget process, we weren't informed about the 120-day notice or buyout or whatever term we want to put to it, that has a significant impact on our budget, anywhere from $65,000 to $70,000. And so, I don't know where those dollars are going to come from. 120 days equates to roughly a quarter of the year. So, if we're already paying that expense, we're almost, we only have 3/4 of the year to fulfill our term of our agreement, which I feel as a councilman that we owe to the vendor to fulfill our obligation, because he did come in previous couple meetings ago and ask for, a reconsideration of his operating cost. And obviously we understand how that has some ramifications if we did that. But I've had some initial conversations with him, and is my understanding that he will close his doors come November 1 if we do not find those appropriations to fill that full year of agreement. Obviously, we're all well versed of how vital that service is to this community, not only from a health standpoint of having an isolated location for yard waste to go, but from our stormwater infrastructure mitigation plan. People are going to find alternative ways to get rid of the yard waste. They'll put them in black bags, and they're going to put them in those blue dumpsters. And so there's implications with the landfill issue too. So I just want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence of making sure we understand the whole ripple effect of what's going to transpire here if we do not fulfill or find funding for this. Obviously, during the budget process, that was my sole reasoning of asking and trying to push for the admin fees from parks. I thought that was an easy way to fund that, and that didn't garner much support. So otherwise, we're going to go into deficit spending, and what I mean by that is that we're going to have to tap into the reserve fund balance to do that, or unless our Public Works Committee can kind of trade and offset some expenses from your budget to where we can offset it with sales tax G monies. So as far as I know, those are the only three options we have available to us if we're committed to trying to find a solution to fulfill our obligation. And I'd like our Public Works Committee to give a recommendation in support or not support, so that the council understands from our perspective of this committee and its responsibility of where we stand. So I would like to make a motion that we endorse the support of this program and try to be committed to finding the funds to finish out the term of the contract. And in that way, that gives us time to renegotiate real quick, it is my understanding also, I thought that Public Works and Parks did contribute whenever they had loads to offload. But again, having discussions with the provider, he says that is not the case, that they are, within the contract, they are allowed a certain amount of tonnage, and they've never gone over that. So again, we do, as a city of operations, receive a huge benefit in that for those two departments. And that's why my thought was that Parks should have some role and responsibility financially in committing to provide this service. It does improve the health and quality of life, which that is the Parks mission. Thank you.
Mr. Kroll.
I just, a couple of things I want to say is, during the budget meeting, I specifically mentioned that there were some contract issues. I don't remember which meeting. It wasn't the last one, but I think it was the one before that. So I specifically identified that there was a contract notification period for that. I don't disagree that.
But there was not discussion of a financial impact to that, though. That's my point.
There, I specifically mentioned that there was a contract piece. I don't know what the financial impact may be. You're correct that Parks doesn't pay directly for that service. I don't know if they have a plan for that. The operator hasn't spoken to me. I don't know if he's spoken to other staff on that specific concern. There may be some other options, one of which would be reimburse people directly for their contribution for whatever compost they take, which has a financial impact. But absolutely, there's a financial impact there. I just don't know what the alternatives are. So I just want to make sure, I'm not disagreeing with you, I just want to make sure that, that record's clear.
Will there be a budget impact, though, that we're going to have to figure out Monday night?
I don't know. I don't know what the contractor's plan is. I had a reporter call me yesterday, I think it was, saying, hey, somebody said they're going to shut down their facility. Well, I don't know that. It probably tells you that we're over-subsidizing that if we're the only thing that's making that operate. There may be some departmental things. I don't know what Parks has got in mind for continuing to operate, if anything. So there may be some financial offset. I just don't know what that is.
It is my understanding, I have talked to the owner-operator himself. He is going to shut down November 1.
Maybe.
So,
I haven't had that discussion with him, yeah.
So, I'm told that there's a 120-day notice period.
Yeah.
Again, that we weren't told the full ramifications of this, though, is my point, from within our budget responsibilities and exercise that we just did.
Yeah, I don't know what that full budget responsibility impact is. That operator hasn't had that discussion with me. I don't know what departments are going to do if they do close. There are some other options, but yeah, it's a service there that is going to go away.
My motion still stands, and I'd like an up or down vote of support or not to support it from this committee.
I'll second his motion.
So I just
Councilman Lester.
like to say I think everybody understands it's a valuable service, and I think the issue is finding money to continue it, and that was part of the budget process too. So the motion, as I understand it, is to look for the money to continue funding it, and I certainly agree with that. I do think we didn't make the best decision about some of the ARPA money, and I certainly would think putting it more towards something like this, understanding it's one time, but it carries us through this first year. Instead of doing beautification downtown, we should do this, but that's just my opinion.
Or again, to fulfill the consistent and normal methodology with our administrative fees. Again, to have Parks on the same level playing field as all the other enterprise funds. Again, that would have solved it as well. So,
Would you restate the motion just to make sure that we've all got the motion?
yeah, from this committee's responsibility from the motion would be that we support the continuation of this service. I will leave the financial portion out of it because that is the full responsibility of the council, so I'm not gonna constrain this committee with that. But I think that is our three options available to us. So my motion again is to vote to support this service to fulfill the 5-year obligation that the city has entered into with this provider.
And to do that will require financial discussion. Any other comments from committee or staff? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That's all the business I'm aware of. So I would entertain Council Member Wiseman's motion if anybody would like to make it.
So moved.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock on the dot.